Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if izayoi sakamaki in high school DxD part 2? Please like and subscribe. And this story belonged to Secret Art Lotus chapter 2, a transfer student QA Academy. Did you hear? One of the girl whispered to her friend sitting next to her. What? Her friend asked. There's a new transfer student coming to this school. I heard from the teacher that he was straight a student from his old school, she explained as her friend wore a surprised look. Really? Her friend asked as she nodded. Yeah, and I heard he was pretty handsome. Handsome than Kiba from the 2-year, she said as her friend now wore a shock look. Really? Then, he must be dreamy, her friend said, trying to fantasize about the unknown transfer student. Yeah, dreamy, the student said with a drool hanging from her lips. Haimji Akeno, a 3rd-year student of the school, and the best friend of Rias, step inside the class after doing some assignment from the student council to guide the new transfer student around the school. She was curious on why she'd had to do this, but the student council president had ordered it to be. So, without any choice, she accepted the offer. And was really curious herself about the transfer student's arrival. Why can't they send someone else? Akeno asked herself as she sat on her seat next to Rias. Akeno turns to look at Rias, who was looking out at the window. Baku. Akeno called out, but Rias didn't respond, and instead continued to stare out at the window. Akeno raised an eyebrow at her strange behavior, as she knows that something was on her mind now and it was disturbing her for a while. Baku. Akeno said more louder as Rias blinked, realizing that someone was calling her. She then turns towards Akeno, who wore a frown. What's that matter, Baku? Akeno asked. It's nothing. It's just what Izayoi-sama said, Rias explained as Akeno raised an eyebrow. Surtsk, she said as Rias nodded. He said someone is coming to this school. Someone stronger than him, Rias said as Akeno suddenly recalled 2 years ago when Surtsk came home with his body heavily bruised, to the point he had to recover from his wounds for 2 weeks. She can't believe the significance of the damages on Surtska's body at that time. He had broke his entire rib, almost his entire body can't move. But luckily he had enough energy to recover himself while he walked to get here. She can't imagine the pain he felt when he got all the bruises on him. To her, it was severe. But the strangest thing that happened was, after Surtsk came home with his badly injured body and spending an hour of recovering, he immediately went outside. Everyone saw what he was doing, but neither of them ever tried to stop him, including Grafia. And since then, the Gremory family immediately sent to search for the devil that beat Surtsk. But Surtsk stopped them from searching, as he suggested that he didn't want to cause enough trouble than it should be. And he told them that he did get beaten up, but he chose the choice to get beaten up. And he reasoned that it was not the person's fault, as he was the one who wanted him to join his peerage. It's his fault. He put it upon himself for underestimating him in the first place, and this is what he got from it. And he answered it with a smile on his face. Rias at that time was shocked beyond belief, including her family. It was shocking to them, to see Surtsk get beaten up so horribly. Surtsk, for his part, told that he was only recruiting the person, but that person didn't want to join in his peerage, and so he suggested a battle, to which Surtsk accepted. After Surtsk told the story, the whole family was shocked to find that even though Surtsk put up his best power of destruction, he was still beaten by him. Flashback. How did he beat you? You couldn't have been beaten while you put your power of destruction to that level of power, Surtska's father said, completely shocked, which caused Surtsk to chuckle dryly. I don't know it myself. He was too fast for me to even sense him, and I underestimated him for what he was, and suddenly I was beaten to the ground. His power is equal to that of ultimate class devils, Surtsk answered as Rias, who was beginning to grow curious about the person who beat her brother, walked up to Surtsk. Izayoi-sama. Who is he? Rias asked with a raised eyebrow, as Surtsk turns to her. Well, all that I can say about him is, he is a powerful opponent to fight with, and a powerful ally to be with, Surtsk said with a hidden smile, masking his true intention to hook her sister with izayoi. Rias said with her hand under her chin, as she thinks for a moment. Akeno, who stood beside her, just watched her thinking, while the whole family just watched on at Rias. So, that means I can make him join my peerage, right? Rias asked as the family gathered in the room, were eye-wide at her statement. You said he was strong. And if he can beat you, he must be strong. And I can make him one of my servant for my peerage, Rias stated as Surtsk laughed. Well, you just have to wait, Ryas-tan. That person will not be so easily persuaded into joining your peerage. I mean, he turned down my offer to join my peerage, Surtsk said as a frown was formed on Ryas's face, thinking that she will never made that person join her peerage. Don't be so sad about it, Ryas-tan. Surtsk comforted as Ryas looked up at him. Even if he turned down my offer, you can still make him join your peerage. You just have to try, Surtsk said as Ryas wore a pout. But I don't want to try. I want him to join my peerage, Ryas replied as Surtsk shook his head with a smile, while in his head, he was cheering that his sister had gained her interest on izayoi. As I said, he won't be so easily persuaded into joining your peerage. But you'll never know, maybe he'll change his mind about joining. But I don't think that would happen anytime soon, Surtsk said as Ryas nods in understanding. And you know, after we fought, I've learned that he is a good guy to be with. And possibly since you don't have a boyfriend, maybe you can be his. Surtsk was completely cut off as Ryas blasted him across the room, with a blush adorning her face. What are you saying? I never even met him, she said, embarrassed that Surtsk would state something like that. You know, you're growing stronger, Ryas-tan, Surtsk said with a wince as the bandages that were wrapped around his waist began to bleed. Well, the whole family can't ignore that you don't like marrying with Riser, Surtsk said as Ryas looked down with gritted teeth. How would you know? Ryas asked. And I know, it's for our family's sake. But trust me, he's a good guy once you get to know him, Surtsk stated as Ryas looked up. Really? Ryas asked as Surtsk nodded. Then do you know where I can find him? Ryas asked as Surtsk stood up with a hand secured around his bleeding waist. In time, Ryas-tan. You just have to wait, Surtsk said as Ryas pouted. Now then, I should be recovering in my room, Surtsk said as he slowly walked to his room, leaving Ryas and her family in the hall. Present. Hey, who is that guy in front of the school? A student asked as instantly everyone in Ryas' class began to gather in front of the windows. Ryas on the other hand ignored it, but then she felt it. She felt a strong presence near the school. Immediately she looked towards her right, standing up and seeing down from her class windows to see a blonde-haired boy standing in front of the school. Who is he? Ryas asked with curiosity. Down at the school gate. This is a big school, izayoi commented looking around Kyoha Academy, with a hand inside his pocket. He then walked past the school gates, as he pulled out his hand from his pocket to reveal a wrapped-up lollipop. He then unwrapped the wrapper, and put the lollipop in his mouth. Hey, you! A voice called out to izayoi, as he turns to a delinquent pointing his hand towards him. Not you again. I already told you. I've got no money. So, ask somebody else, izayoi said with a wave of his hand, as he turns to walk inside the school. But he was stopped as he heard multiple footsteps behind him. Oh, I've got somebody else to ask. To ask for your death? Get him, boys, the delinquent leader stated as all of the delinquents that gathered in front of the school rushed towards izayoi, with baseball bats in hand. Izayoi was about to go inside the school, but he stopped as he turns around towards the approaching group. He turns to see a white-haired girl just passing by, but she stopped in the middle to get the candy she dropped. The girl was between him and the group's way. The girl picked up her candy as she turns to see a group of delinquents heading her way. Just as the group of delinquents was about to run the girl over, they were suddenly blown away from the surprised girl. Oi, you can't run a little girl over, izayoi said with a smirk, suddenly appearing in front of the girl. And for that, you're all gonna pay, izayoi stated smirking as he suddenly vanished from sight, surprising everyone who watched the confrontation, especially Ryas, who watched with surprise and interest. The group of delinquents hastily stood up, as they picked up their baseball bats from the ground and held it in their hands. They then looked around for any signs of izayoi, but they couldn't find him anywhere. I'm over here, a voice called out as the group looked towards the voice. Izayoi stood with a beat-up delinquent beneath his feet. You're next, izayoi stated as he dashed towards the group, to which the group charged at him with their bats held up high to hit him. Izayoi then crouched, dodging a few bats in the process, as he aimed his fist at one of the delinquent in front of him. That's not going to work, izayoi exclaimed as he punched the delinquent in the stomach, and suddenly the delinquent was then blasted off, dragging the whole group to the air and outside the school gate, the whole group completely out cold by the force of the punch. Well, that's boring, izayoi commented, seeing as the group of delinquent wasn't so much as giving him a challenge even if there were many of them. Izayoi looked up towards the out-cold delinquents and noticed that the leader was nowhere to be found. He then turns around towards the girl as he suddenly vanished. You. It was because of you. We were beaten like losers. The leader of the gang said as he approached the white-haired girl who held a candy in her hand. The leader slapped the candy off the little girl's hand, which prompted to fall onto the ground. The little girl watched as the leader crushed the candy into pieces by stepping on it. Now, die, the leader said, holding up a real katana in his hand, as he swung it down on the girl. But before the katana could touch the girl, it was stopped by a hand. The leader looked up towards the owner of the hand, and suddenly he dropped his katana as he backed away from izayoi, who stopped the katana with just his 2 fingers securing it in place. You know, I thought you wouldn't keep something like this. But using it to kill a girl. That's unforgivable, izayoi said with a cold look. But then I'm here. So you should run, or else, izayoi said, picking the katana and twisting it in his hand. He then held the sword and pointed it towards his other hand. Everyone who was watching stood in surprise as izayoi pointed the katana at himself. Izayoi then pushed the katana towards his other hand, and suddenly the katana was being bent. By izayoi pushing his other hand towards the katana. The katana sharp blade was bent to its hilt, leaving it useless for fighting and killing or even repairing. What are you? Are you some kind of monster? The leader asked in fear as he slowly stepped back away from izayoi, who held a smirk on his face. I don't know. But do you want find out for yourself? Izayoi questioned as the leader furiously shakes his head as he immediately run away from izayoi, but not before he run towards his unconscious group. Let's get out of here, he yelled as the entire group woke up from the unconscious state, and immediately the gang of delinquent run away from Kyoah Academy. Well, that's boring. How can I get something fun over here besides finding weak delinquents to fight? Izayoi commented. With a sigh. Izayoi then turns around towards the white-haired girl. Here, izayoi stated as he pulled out another lollipop inside his pocket and gave it to the girl, which she accepted. Thank you, the white-haired girl said as izayoi pat her head. No problem. But I'm running late for my class. See you later, izayoi said as he stroked her head a few times, before he walked past her. He then spotted a trash can beside a school building entrance, as he walked over to it and dropped the bent-up katana in. Izayoi then turns around towards the school entrance, and just as he was about to enter the school, Rying, izayoi looked up towards the sound being made by the school bell. Looks like I'm really late to school. Well, it's better than learning first, izayoi exclaimed. With a smirk as he walked inside the school, leaving the white-haired girl. The girl then felt her head by putting her hand on top of it, as a small smile appeared on her face, liking her head being stroked by izayoi earlier. With that mind, she walked off to her classroom while intending to find izayoi to stroke her again. Izayoi looked down towards his school paper, of where his class was located and his class schedule. He then looked up, to see students coming out from their classes and passing him to go to the cafeteria. Izayoi continued walking while girls standing beside the school walls giggled and blushed as izayoi walked by them. Is that the new transfer student? A girl whispered to her friend. He looks so handsome. A girl stared dreamily at izayoi. Yeah, another girl stated with a blush adorning her cheeks. Izayoi then turns to the 3 girls, hearing their talk about him, as he smiled at them, which caused them to blush furiously. Izayoi turns around to continue his walk to his class, passing a set of stairs on his way. On top of the stairs where izayoi passed, were 2 females watching him as he walked to their class. Akeno, who was that? A young woman in her late teens asked. She had a buxom figure and blue-green eyes. Her most distinctive feature is her long, crimson-red hair that reaches down to her thighs, with a single hair strand sticking out from the top. Her hair also has loose bangs covering her forehead and side bangs framing her face. She wore the Kyoah Academy school uniform, which consists of a white long-sleeved, button-down shirt, short sleeves for spring/summer, with a black ribbon on her shirt collar worn under a black shoulder cape and a matching button-down corset, a magenta skirt with white accents, and brown dress shoes over white crew-length socks. I think he is the new transfer student. He is Sakamaki Izayoi. He is said to be exceptional in academics, sports, and he is the most popular student in his school. He is said to have not studied for the entire time he was in school, suspecting to be homeschooled. His behavior in sports angers some of the school's athletes, with him offering challenges to them to see if they could beat him. Some boys in his school called him a juvenile high school student. Akeno stated as Rias raised an eyebrow at the title he was given. A juvenile high school student. Rias asked as Akeno nodded. We have to investigate about him. He is interesting. And I heard you have to guide him around the school after school. Rias said turning to Akeno who nodded. Sakamaki izayoi-kun. Rias said as a sparkle of interest could be seen in her eyes. She and Akeno then left the stairs to enjoy the recess time they've had. Izayoi arrived at his class as he looked around to see if anybody was there. But there wasn't. He then walked inside the class and looked through the rows of seats in front of him. He walked through the seats beside the window and eventually set his bag on his decided seat. Strangely he looked down besides the other seat which was right next to him, feeling strange about the seat. He shrugged off the strange feeling as he sit on his seat and lay down his head on the desk with his hands supporting his head. With a yawn, he closed his eyes and drifted into slumber. Izayoi. A voice was calling him, as Izayoi slowly opened his eyes and blinked a few times. Izayoi. The voice called again, as Izayoi rubbed his eyes with his right hand, trying to dismiss the sleepiness. He then turns to the owner of the voice, and his eyes widen at the voice's owner. Hi. Have a nice sleep. Rias exclaimed with a smile waving her hand at him. Yeah. Thanks for waking me up. Izayoi said as Rias nodded in appreciation. Now that Sakamaki-kun is awake. Care to give us an introduction, Sakamaki-kun? The teacher asked as Izayoi turns to the teacher and nods. He then stood up from his seat, and walked over to the teacher, standing in front of the whole class. Izayoi looked through the whole class, as a smirk appeared on his face. As you can see I'm dangerous, unrefined, and the name's Sakamaki Izayoi. Izayoi introduced as he raised up his hand. I'm also crude, vicious and hedonistic. He said as he raised up 3 fingers of the statement of himself. I'm the worst type of person there is, so I recommend you read all the warning labels before you glare at me, boys. Izayoi said. With a smirk, as the boys inside the class glared daggers at him, angered that their girlfriends were watching Izayoi with a blush and was looking at him with stars in their eyes. The teacher sweat drop at the interaction between the two. Well, Sakamaki-kun, it's nice to have you in the academy. And we hope we can have a wonderful year together, okay? The teacher asked as Izayoi nodded before you. Sit down on his seat. Nice introduction. Rias said giggling as she saw the boys glared at Izayoi for making their girls' hearts flutter. Well, I give them an introduction, didn't I? Izayoi asked as Rias nodded. Class, pull out your math textbooks and open to page 13. The teacher said as the students followed his instructions. Izayoi sighed, laying down his head again while he looked at the teacher teaching, knowing that it was a long day before the school bell rings. After school that was boring. Izayoi sighed as he stood up from his seat, picking up his bag and sliding it on his right shoulder. He looked at the now empty class, as he decided to leave a little late than them. Some of the girls waved him goodbye, to which he waved them back with a smile, while the boys glared daggers at him again. The boys then escort their girls home, while Izayoi suppressed a smirk, finding it fun to mess with the boys. Izayoi was about to leave the class but he was stopped by a voice. Wait. A voice called out to him, as Izayoi turns to see Akeno walking up to him. Who are you? He asked raising an eyebrow. Oh, my name is Himejima Akeno. Call me Akeno, Sakamaki-san. She said with a bow. Just call me Izayoi. So, what did you want to talk about? Izayoi asked. The student council president had sent her regards to you, and she wants me to give you a tour around the school. Akeno said as Izayoi smirked. Thanks for the regards. But I don't want any tour. I'll tour around by myself. Izayoi said with an arrogant smirk, as he turns around and left the class. Isn't that rude? Akeno stated finding it annoying that Izayoi just left like that. He is a juvenile high school student, after all. She said as she left the class, trying not to wipe out that smirk out of his face with her power. Outside of school Izayoi stopped just in front of the school gates. Rias Grammary, huh? Izayoi whispered as a smirk slowly formed on his face. I'm starting to think that this will only be getting fun from now on. He said as he sensed that someone was watching him from afar. He decided to ignore it, as he continued on his way to his home. Who are you, Izayoi-kun? Rias asked looking at him, from the window of her club. Izayoi walked along the streets, while he looked up seeing the orange sky. Huh? Izayoi said as he bumped someone, making the person fall on the ground. Could you watch the road for a second? The person, which was a girl, said in annoyance, laying on the ground while she held a hand to her head to nurse her headache of hitting izayoi. Oh, sorry. Izayoi said, extending a hand to the girl as the girl looked towards the hand. Don't worry, I won't bite. Izayoi said with a smirk, as the girl eventually grabbed his hand and Izayoi slowly pulled her up from the ground. Well, do you have anything to say for yourself? The girl asked as Izayoi raised an eyebrow. What? He asked as he took in her appearance. The girl has blue eyes and long brown hair that is fringed and braided at the ends on either side and reaches past her waist. Also, she wore a white blouse with a yellow ribbon bow tie, a navy blue business skirt and brown heels. Well, you're the one who should apologize for bumping into me. Why should I? The girl said in annoyance as Izayoi held a smirk. Oh, Izayoi said as the girl glared at him. I don't like to repeat what I said, Mr. High School student with the mean-looking eyes. The girl stated as Izayoi just held a smirk. Anyway, why don't you look before you hit me? Izayoi questioned with a sly smirk, as the girl held a hand to herself. I'm in a hurry. That's why. But you're the one who should look out before you hit me. The girl said, annoyed as Izayoi chuckles. What is so funny, might I ask? The girl asked. Why are you in a hurry? Is that an excuse that I should believe? Izayoi asked as the girl. Believe it or don't, I'm in a hurry. And since I'm late, I'll be going, even without your apology. The girl said, walking past Izayoi. Yeah? But you can't go whatever you are going without this red ribbon, right? Izayoi asked, holding up a red ribbon, as the girl turns to look at the red ribbon. She then held a hand to the right side of her head, feeling the missing ribbon. The girl then looked at Izayoi, as she extended her hand to grab the ribbon. Give it back, she shouted as Izayoi pulled back his hand from her reaching hand. Turn around, Izayoi said as the girl suddenly raised an eyebrow. What? She asked. Just turn around, Izayoi said as the girl sighed, forgetting about the ribbon for a moment as she turns around, her back facing Izayoi. Izayoi slowly walked behind her as he gently grabbed a hold of her hair, and he slowly tied the red ribbon into a bow around it. He slowly pulled back, seeing the red bow he made was the same as the other bow on the left side of her head. Done, Izayoi said as the girl turns around and she held up a hand on the red bow that Izayoi made. Now I have to go, I have a nap to finish, young girl, Izayoi said as he turns around to leave, but he was stopped by a voice calling out to him. Wait, the girl shouted as Izayoi turns his head around at her. Thank you, but you shouldn't address me as young girl. My name is Kyuto Asuka. Remember that from now on. And you, the dangerous, unrefined-looking guy, would be. The girl stated as Izayoi gave her a smirk about her introduction of him. Don't thank me, I'm just repaying my debt of bumping into you. And I have to thank you for that wonderfully antagonistic introduction of yours. As you can see, I'm dangerous, unrefined, and the name's Sakamaki Izayoi. Izayoi introduced at the girl, as he held up his hand. I'm also crude, vicious, and hedonistic. I'm the worst type of person there is, so I recommend reading all the warning labels before taking that attitude when dealing with me, Aju-sama. Izayoi said with a smirk. I'll think about it if you write down all those warning labels in a manual, Asuka said as Izayoi laughed cheerfully. Seriously? I'll write something up a bit later, so you better be ready, Izayoi said as he pulled out something from his pocket and throws it at Asuka, to which she caught it with both hands. Here, Izayoi said as Asuka opened up her hands to see that it was a lollipop. Well, I'm going to go. And didn't you mention that you have somewhere to be right now? Izayoi asked as Asuka's eyes widened, recalling that she was late. Why yeah, Asuka said in a hurry as she turns to leave, but she stayed. I hope we meet again. And thanks for the lollipop, Asuka said while Izayoi just stared at her. Izayoi-kun, she stated as she left, leaving Izayoi to look at her. With a smile on his face, Izayoi began to leave, walking towards the park where he should walk through it to get to his home. Ah! Izayoi's eyes narrowed at the painful cry, but he just ignored it as he continued to walk to his home. But something stopped him, as he sensed a powerful energy coming from where the painful was from. And that triggers him to eventually disappeared without a trace. Sorry, your existence poses a threat to us. So we took in the initiative and moved in for the kill. Blame God for planting a sacred gear inside your body, Yuma said, sitting on a fountain, as Issei Hayudo held his bleeding stomach in pain. Essay. What? Issei said in thought before he coughed up blood and fell down on his back. This is an interesting sight to see. A voice said as Yuuma looked towards the voice. You would be an amazing girl if you weren't a fallen angel. Izayoi said with a smirk, appearing before the two. Who are you? No matter, but why can't God grant the sacred gear in you? It would be so much fun to kill an handsome man like you, Yuuma said as a spear of light appeared around her hand. Well, I hope you die, Yuuma said with a sweet smile, as Izayoi could see the spear slowly appear soaring towards him in high speed. Well, I'm not the one to interrupt, but you're wrong if you think I'm gonna die. Izayoi smirked as he clenched his fist and punched the spear, destroying it into pieces, shocking Yuuma and Issei who watched from the sides while he holds his bleeding stomach. What? How could you? Yuuma said, but she was cut off as Izayoi suddenly appeared in front of her. It was fun seeing you, Yuuma-chan. Izayoi said as Yuuma's eyes widened, and Izayoi punched her in the stomach, launching her straight to the sky. Ugh! Yuuma said, holding her painful and extremely sore stomach as she looked down at Izayoi who was smirking at her. Say hello to some of your friends for me, Izayoi said as Yuuma gritted her teeth, not wanting to retreat, but she wasn't taking a risk on fighting with Izayoi, so she fled by flying away from Izayoi. Izayoi then turns to Issei who was bleeding on the ground, as he walked over to him. If you were going to kill me, you could have at least let me squeeze your boobs. I could only catch a glance, but Yuuma-chan has great boobs, Issei said as Izayoi raised an eyebrow at his perverted comment. You're sick. Are you sure I shouldn't leave you right now, by your perverted comment? Izayoi comment as Issei looked at him as he shook his head. Izayoi ignoring him for a second, looked at something that was poking out of his pocket. He pulled it out as he stared at it for a second, as his eyes widened a little. This, Izayoi said as he gripped the piece of flyer tightly. Oi, what's your wish? Izayoi asked as Issei looked at him. I want to die in the bosom of beautiful girl like her, Issei spelled out as he coughed up blood. Izayoi said as he closed his eyes. Rias, he said as the flyer glowed red and Izayoi let go of the flyer, as it flies to the sky and then it opens up to reveal a summoning portal, with red intricate writings around it. The portal then slowly lowered down revealing Rias Gremory in her school uniform. You called me here, didn't you Izayoi-kun? Rias asked as Izayoi looked at her. Since you're here, you can get this perverted boy off my hands, Izayoi said nudging Issei with his feet. Rias looked at him, as a smile appeared on her face and she nodded towards his request. And I know you're here, Akeno, Izayoi said as Akeno came out from behind the trees, having to disguise herself from being seen. How did you know? She asked. I never lose in hide and seek, he simply stated as. Rias giggled at his answer. Akeno, get Issei out of here, Rias commanded as Akeno nodded as walked beside Issei and raised her hand as a transportation circle suddenly appeared beneath Issei and her. We'll meet again, Izayoi, Akeno said with a bow, as she and Issei were gone. Izayoi looked at Rias who didn't go along with them, as he raised his eyebrow. Why are you still standing here? Didn't you have a transportation circle like her? Izayoi asked referring to Akeno as Rias offered him a sweet smile. Well, she can heal Issei for a while. But in the meantime, let's get to know each other more, Rias said smiling at him, as Izayoi smirked. Okay, Rias Aju-sama. Be my guest.